Can't come today because I don't know. He texted me in the middle of the night. He's not able to come today. But you take your toss off. Take your time. Let's start.
So, why is Paul not coming today?
He went to Phoenix to buy more wood for a project.
Oh,
For a project for us?
Yeah, for the mechitzas.
in other words, he's working today.
Yeah.
For us.
Actually, I have to have him pick something up for me.
He's gonna work for us.
Okay, Mendel, try and do that as quiet as you can, okay? All right, let's go. So, couple things. So tonight is Tisha B'Av. So at nightfall, 7:37 tonight, we're not meant to eat until tomorrow, 8:04 p.m. And we don't wear leather shoes. There's a bunch of laws. We don't wear leather shoes tonight until tomorrow. Tomorrow,
That's all I have.
people wear slippers, stuff like that.
Okay.
Tonight we're going to do a service here, and tomorrow, but tonight's very short. Tomorrow morning I'll be here, but the main thing is tomorrow night for us. We will put on our tefillin towards the evening, so it's going to do it at 6:15 p.m. And then we do a special service, and then afterwards we'll watch like a video presentation until the fast ends at 8:04 p.m. And then we'll have a break fast here. So that's
Forget about the bees.
basically what we'll do. Okay,
Forgot about the bees.
so let's go. So we're holding on chapter 5, Daily Rambam. We're learning about the grace after meals. After we mentioned that before we eat, we need to make blessings, and after we eat, we need to blessings. You need help finding it? I can find it for you really easily. You want me to get it for you?
Nope, I got it.
Okay, let's go. So women and slaves are obligated to do the grace after meals. However, to doubt if they need to, because the Torah says, because there's no set time to do it, women have to do every positive mitzvah, except for ones which have a set time. So this grace after meals, you do it whenever you eat. There's no set time to do it, or not. Therefore, women should not say the blessings on behalf of a man, because men are for sure obligated biblically. Women are not necessarily obligated. They're for sure obligated, at least rabbinically, but they shouldn't do it on behalf because the nature of their prayer of grace after meals is different. However, children need to do it for the rabbis. For one thing's for sure, children need to do it from the rabbis. Rabbis have obligation for children to do it. 3 people who ate at one. Number 2, 3 people who ate like one. They need to do Birkat HaMazon. They have to do it together. Birkat HaZimun. They have to do a special blessing, and they do it get together after they eat. And what is the Birkat HaZimun? If they were eating from 3 until 10 people, they say Nevarach Shachal Mishaloi, and everyone answers Baruch Shachal Mishaloi Tuvachenu, and then he says Baruch Shachal Mishaloi Tuvachenu.
Are men only included in that, or are women included?
Only men are included in that group. Okay, because again, men are obligated biblically. Women, it's not clear from the Torah. They're for sure obligated 100%, but not necessarily obligated biblically. So they can't do it on behalf of men. Men could do it on behalf of women because we're for sure obligated biblically. Afterwards, you read until the end of the blessings, and everyone says Amen. So, one way of doing it, the way they did in the olden days, nowadays we each have a book so we can each read it. But in the olden days, the way they would do it is one guy would say it on behalf of everybody, and then everyone would answer Amen after each blessing. If you're eating from 10 people and above, you say it with God's name. You add in God's name into the special prayer for 3 people. That prayer is called the Birkat HaZimun. And everyone answers Baruch Elokeinu Shachal Mishaloi Tuvachenu, and then he says Baruch Elokeinu Shachal Mishaloi Tuvachenu. If you're eating in the house of a groom and bride, when you from the time that you start preparing for the wedding until after 30 days, you say an extra blessing, Nevarach Shasimcha B'Ma'ono, that we have our joyous occasion. Okay, Baruch. Okay, and then everyone answers accordingly. And if there are 10 people, you add the word Elokeinu, and these are the different ways we do it. Okay, everyone needs to do Birkas HaZimun, just like Birkas HaMazon. Even Kohanim who are eating the holy of holy meats in the temple. Similarly, Kohanim and Yisrael eat like one, and the Kohanim are eating Truma, and the regular Jews are eating non-holy food. They still need to do it together. Women, slaves, and children, they need to do it also together. So if 3 women are eating together, the Rambam says that they also should do it. Women, slaves, and children, you don't do it with them. Males don't do it with them. They don't say the prayer with them. but they say it themselves. And you shouldn't have women, slaves, and children eating together because that's not so modest. Rather, women for themselves, or slaves for themselves, or children for themselves. But they shouldn't mention God's name. Androgynous, we said androgynous is somebody who has both male and female features. So they do it with other androgynuses, but they don't do it with women and they do it with men. Because men and women, because androgynous, we're not sure what they are, if they're male or female. And a tumtum is someone who has, his features are hidden under his skin, so we don't know if he's male or female, but he is one of the others, so he can't join anyone, because if he joins women, he might actually be a male. If he joins males, he might be a woman. A child who knows how to bless, you could do it with him, even though he's 7 or 8 years old, and he can join in the 3 or the 10. A Gentile, we do not include in the Zimun blessing. We don't do a Zimun unless people ate a olive-size amount of bread and above. 7 people ate bread and 3 people ate vegetables or soup or something like that. You can join with them. And this is that one, the one who's blessing for everyone did eat bread. However, 6 people ate bread and 4 vegetables. They don't join together until the people who ate bread are the recognized majority. So 6 and 4 people is not considered a recognized majority because it's just one different. In Jewish law, the 7 and 3 is a recognized majority. So if you come into the room and you say, hey, look, did most of the people eat bread? If it's 7 people, you'll say, yeah, that's obvious. Okay. When do we say this? Until we have 10. However, 3 people, you need each one to eat a olive size of bread, and then afterwards you could do it. 2 people who ate a meal together, and then they finished eating, and a third one comes. If he's able to eat even a tiny bit with them from anything, he can join them. And a really big sage, he can bless for everyone, even though he came in the end. 3 people who eat like one, you're not allowed to separate from each other. And similarly, 4 people and similarly 5. 6 people you can separate because you can be 3 and 3. 2 groups of 3. 10 people, you're not able to separate until you have 20. That you can basically have the same quality. You can have divide into 2 minions, then you can separate. But if once you have a minion is special. 3 people that came from 3 groups of 3 people that came from 3 groups of 3. They cannot divide, and if each group already made it, then they could. And you don't have to do a zimun because you already did a zimun. So if you already joined one, you're allowed to separate from the next one. 3 people that ate, even though each one of them ate from his own, they're not permitted to divide. 2 groups that were eating in one house, when they can see each other. So here you have 2 groups eating in one house. When they can see each other, they can join together. But if they cannot see each other, they're considered in separate rooms, so they cannot join as this group of 3 and make a special prayer. If there's one waiter, then they can join, even though they don't see each other. But that's so as long as they can hear whoever's blessing. So if you have a house and the one waiter, he can join the 2 groups into one group. 3 people that ate, and one of them went out to the store. They call him back in order that he can listen. And he can join with them, and he's outside, but they can do it. When he goes to his place, he just say Birkas HaMazon for himself. He should say the grace of the meal for himself. But 10 people that ate, and one of them left, you don't have him join unless he's sitting there. 3 people that ate like one, and one of them went and he already finished benching. You could do it with him. And this is that he wasn't already part of a zimun. 2 people that each one blesses for themselves, and if there's one of them who knows and one of them doesn't know, then one of them can say it out loud and the other one can say Amen. And a child can do for a son can do for his father, a servant for his master, and a lady for her husband. However, the rabbis say someone should not do it. It's not good if a lady does it for men, or a child does it for his father. When do we say this? When they ate and they weren't satisfied. If they ate, we said earlier that only if you're satisfied does the Bible say you have to thank God after meals. If you're not satisfied, you don't have to. So therefore, the rabbi said, even if you're not satisfied, if you ate a decent amount, then you still need to do the grace after meals. So now, A woman and a child, they're only obligated from the rabbinical. Women we don't know, but a child, they're only obligated from rabbinical. Woman is at least rabbinically has to do the grace after meals. So if you're not satisfied, you're also rabbinically obligated. So then they could do it for each other. However, if they ate and they're satisfied, so therefore, if a male eats and he's satisfied, therefore he's biblically obligated. A woman can no longer do it for, because a woman might not be biblically obligated. Okay, because everyone is obligated from the Torah, cannot be absolved by someone who's not obligated from the Torah. Someone who goes and he sees they're doing Birkat Hamazon, if he finds the one who's reading it says Navarach and he says Baruch Umvarach, he does not answer the regular thing that says, yeah, let's do the blessing together. He says, blessed is the one he's blessing. And if he sees them saying Baruch Chalnu, he should say Amen. All right, so those are the laws of Zimun. We'll get to Tanya Chapter 33.
Are we starting at, like in the middle of the chapter?
So we did only a few lines at the beginning.
Right, okay, I got it.
Okay. So we spoke about, in general, the different sadness and different types of ways that a human being functions. We said a lot of it has to do with human beings placing priority on physical needs, physical things, and forgetting that they're here for a higher purpose. And when you're here for a higher purpose, then you can unleash your soul. And then you'll realize that in every situation and everything, you have a joyous purpose to fulfill. That's what we said.
That's a really difficult thing for me to do because I spent most of my life just in the physical.
Yes.
Right?
Well, it's quite difficult for everybody in a certain sense because the way we are is we're born into, our default is very physical.
Right.
So the only way to do it, is take time to think about it a lot. And the Tanya says that when we think about it a lot, eventually it rewires our brain. When we think about things, and not when we think about things to rewire our brain, but we just think about it for the sake of thinking. Because when we try and change how we feel about something with our thoughts, a lot of times our feelings fight back. And they say, hey, don't try and control me. But when we take time to think about different things, just think about the ideas behind them and how deep they are and just try and review them and go over them with our head, it actually does eventually have a strong effect on our emotional wellness. Okay, so here we said we started a new chapter, and this chapter was lesson deficit. In other words, this chapter said basically that a person, when you need to become happy, these are the things you should think about. So we said, what should you think about? Well, we said, first of all, when you're thinking about it, you have to think about it for a lot, till the extent that it becomes totally engraved in your brain, till it becomes default in your brain. So, that is a lot of thought. When there's a lot of times ideas that we have, and only after a while do they finally become default in our mind. A lot of times sometimes it can take years, because our brain wants to think a certain way. So what we said what you should do is go into the real depth and think about the oneness of God. And we explained, number one, God gives energy to everything. Nothing can run without God. God is in every detail of the world. We said, number two, not only does God give energy to everything, but actually this whole world is created by God. So, when God gives energy, he gives different energy to each object. But really, the differences in every object is really the same, because they're all directly created by God. They're all created something from nothing. They're all essentially God's creations, and therefore they're all really nothing besides God. Then all matter is nothing besides God. And then we said, furthermore, not only that, but we said at this moment right now, they are literally being played and energized and upkept by God. So therefore, when we're looking at the world and we see a situation or a certain object, we need to remember that the constraints and the qualities that object has is totally God created, God given and God created. Okay, so now we're going to continue on, And I believe it should start with the words, and he is alone.
Right on.
Okay. V'hu levadahu b'elyonim v'tachtonim. God is alone in the higher worlds and the lower worlds. Just like he was alone before the 6 days of creation. So, God, before the world was created, the Midrash says there was just God. Right? Now he creates a world. Well, that would mean that there's God and a world. But in truth, the Tanya says, is actually God is the only thing exactly the same as before he created the world. Why? Because the world is really him. The world is really him. Right?
So when they say the world, is that only talking Earth, or are we talking about
All
the entire
universe.
universe?
All universe.
Okay.
Okay, so the world is, and the universe is totally him now. The whole universe was created at the beginning of creation, 6 days of creation. So now, what we're saying is that you might say, like, okay, before there was only God, so everything was in his control. But now different things have control. God created them. He gave them control, right? That's not true. Still, the whole universe is just God alone. Continue on. Even in this place, in this world, where it's created, this world, the heavens and the earth, v'chol tzavam, and all the hosts in heaven, so now we tend to think that we're in a vacuum. Like God created a bubble, and this bubble is void of him. We don't see him. The Alter Rebbe is saying that even in this bubble, it's only him, just like before. Because the whole creation is him created constantly. It's all him. So we're going to give now two parables of kind of intellectual parables that explain this idea. And it's a very deep idea that has to be thought out about a lot. Why? All creations are confined to being his. They are all totally subdued to him. There's nothing that we can do outside of him, because everything we have is being created by him right now. As we said, constant creation. So if we say like, oh, I'm gonna do this wrong thing, you're taking a body which is created by him, and a mind that's wanting to do it, and a will that's wanting to do the wrong thing, and a mind that's understanding the world a certain way, which are all created by him at this moment. So he's really in all that. This is just like the words and letters and thoughts in their source of the soul. I'm going to explain this in a second. So a human being, we basically classify ourselves. Our consciousness is thought, speech, and action. Those are our consciousness. And earlier the Alter Rebbe says that is what God gives us the choice over, to run over. Now, sometimes we don't necessarily have a choice nowadays, but our thoughts, speech, and action. Our emotions, our perception, the way we perceive things is not in our hands, right? That is in God's hands. God creates it for us. So, we always have, especially nowadays where people are hypersensitive emotionally, the old generation said, this is what you have to feel, or this is the right thing. And we just can't feel it because we feel something different, or we perceive something different. Now, really the truth is the way we work is our intellect, our brain, and our perception in our brain exists before our thoughts. And our thoughts come and they develop words and ideas from our intellect. So we perceive something a certain way. Why do we perceive it that way? Just because, right? And there are layers of different experiences might change how we perceive, but the way we perceive those experiences are already programmed in our brain. So now, here's what the Alter Rebbe says. It's very interesting. He says, when I speak, that means I had to have some sort of emotion or thought or idea to speak about. If you will go and you'll dissect the human and you'll go into his perception or you'll go into his emotion, there's no words. There's no letters, right? Only once it goes through our consciousness do we develop words and do we develop tools of expression. So the Alter Rebbe says, he says, really, the potential for those expression exists in our emotions. You just can't see that because at that point our emotion is so into feeling, it doesn't have expression. So a lot of times we try and explain our emotions and we don't do an adequate job. Sometimes we explain it and then we leave and say, no, that's not what I mean. I don't want this. Why? I don't know why. I just don't want this, right? We have that all the time. So the Alter Rebbe says, the Torah says, the world is created from God's words. God's words come from God's perception, so to speak, that he creates, and his emotions that he creates, which are called the 10 Sfirot. These are called the 10 tools of God's being, of God's manifestation. Now, those words, ultimately, when I say something to you, I may mean it or not, but the words leave me, and now they belong to public, right? They can be printed, and people can take them. However, God's words never leave him. So when God says in the world, let there be light, or whatever there is, those ideas are really still in God's soul. They're really still in God's, they're totally nothing compared to the emotion that they come from, and compared to the thought, the perception that God has. So that's what we're saying, that even though the world creates, now when I speak, right, I have now expressed something that has left my body, it's left my field. God's words never leave his field. They're always connected to God. So now when we're looking at God, if I say, this is an idea I have, that's nothing compared to my perception, where it came from. Do you understand what I'm saying? If I say, this is what I want to do, that's nothing compared to the emotions that I had, which developed that idea that I'm expressing. The words are like cheap. Talk is cheap. The words are like compared to the real ideas that I have. So it's the same thing with God. There's, so to speak, God's real ideas, or real will. And then there's the words which create the world. And what we're saying now is, just like my words are nothing, how much more so God's words which create the world are nothing compared to what he wants, and compared to his wisdom and what he perceives. So this is what we're saying. This is how we can see that God is the only thing in the world. In other words, this whole creation that we see around us is nothing. It's just God's speech, which is really nothing compared to God. So that is number one. That's something which the Alter Rebbe is giving us tools to think about this, how God's words are nothing compared to what he wants, right? So we know God wants a dwelling place down here. So he creates this whole world for a dwelling place down here. Compared to God's will of the purpose of the creation is nothing. It's just serving something higher. It's nothing, and it's really all God. So that is the first parable the Alter Rebbe gives. This is something that has to be thought about for a long time. And the Alter Rebbe is a master at giving tools that when we think about these things, it kind of accesses and it reprograms a certain perception that we have. Now the second thing is the Alter Rebbe now gives a physical, so that's all in the soul. Now the soul is sometimes hard to understand. We as humans think that everything is thought and speech and action. We don't know that, no, obviously, just like we have a body which acts, our soul has to have a certain level of perception and understanding in order to think and in order to feel. So the same thing is, so here's Alter Rebbe says, here and elsewhere, it gives a physical parable for this. Mashal gashma zeh me'inyan bittul ziv v'or hashemesh b'mukayr. V'hu guf kader hashemesh v'erkiyah. So now we look at the sun, right? Now, the sun generally, in our perception, has two parts. In Chassidus, a lot of times it says it has three parts. But what are the two parts? There's the sun, and then there's the light of the sun. The light reaches all the way down here. We can divide and separate them, right? There's the light of the sun and the sun. Now, as you go closer to the sun, so if the light of the sun lights up all the way down here, however many light years away we are, right? How much more so when you go closer, the sun only gets brighter. Why does the sun get brighter? Why does the light, the rays of sun get brighter when you get closer to the sun? What do you think? Well, the origin is the sun. So as we get closer to the origin, the brighter it is, right?
Sure.
As the rays go further, they get less bright, right? Just like a flashlight. So now when we get into the sun, if you would get into the core of the sun, whatever it is, would there be rays of sunlight in the sun? It's hard to say. Of course there has to be rays because the sun is emanating them. But in the sun, we don't say there are rays in the sun. We're in the sun, right? You can't see rays. So now, where do we see the rays of sun more? Actually, when you're outside of the sun, right? Because that's where you could discern and say, hey, there's light here, right? It's morning, there's light all the way here, right? Let's reflect the light. Let's look at the light outside, lighting up the world. However, where are they stronger? Inside the sun. The closer they go to the sun, the less they are separate, the less they are discernible. Now, in the sun themselves, there have to be in the sun because they come out of the sun, right? So obviously there has to be in the sun, but in the sun, we can't call them rays. So here it says here, Minyan bittul zivar hashemesh b'mokayrei. This is like the word we use here is bittul. Bittul is hard. It means, people always translate it as nullified, nothingness. The sun, the rays of sun are nothing inside the sun. Hu guf kadar shemesh v'rakia, and that is in the sphere of the sun in the sky. Shagam sham meir mispashet vade zivar. For sure, inside the sun, there is the rays that are out here exist inside the sun, and even more powerful. Uviyaser says, mispashtus varas b'chal olam. The rays of the sun must be even stronger inside the sun than they are the way they are down here. There, we cannot discern that they are rays. There, they are nothing. The potential of them is nothing. So similarly, just like the soul has the ability to express itself, but the expression is outside of it. Inside the soul, for sure the soul has ways of expressing itself. We just don't see it as clearly. It's not as eloquent, just like you might read a book about someone's emotions, right? Inside their actual emotions, those letters and those words must exist. We just don't see them because the emotions are too powerful there. We're too, and the perception is too strong there. Only when you're trying to express yourself outside of yourself do words come about. And same thing with the sun. When we're outside the sun, then we see rays. Why? Because there's no sun here. When we're inside the sun, we can't see rays of the sun. The rays are nothing. The sun is the real thing. It's almost as if the rays of sun don't exist at all. Right? Yet outside the sun, if we were traveling to the sun, we'd say there's no rays here. It's just the sun, right? Outside the sun, now, we might take those rays and get solar panels and we'd be like, wow, the sun rays are all the way here. Well, if you take the solar panels in the sun, it wouldn't be getting from rays, it would melt, but it would be getting from the sun itself. So, so in the later on in the Tanya, it explains how everything in the world is nothing. Is literally nothing. It's not just like, oh yeah, it's basically nothing, but everything in our life is literally nothing compared to God. And it brings this parable. And it says, what is the world? The world, the defined world that we see. The defined world that we see is a something, right? It's something, it's defined. We have all these definitions. It's like rays of the sun. However, God is everywhere. So we're actually existing in a reality where the rays have never left the sun.
So how do people who are not spiritual then think about the sun? I mean, and God.
So here's what the Alter Rebbe wants us to do. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe wants to think about this for a long time. We know that God is everywhere because if He's not everywhere, then there must be a void of Him, something else. And that thing must be a God. And if there's two gods, well, there must be one origin that created two gods. And that's what we'll really call God, right? So we know the origin of everything is everywhere, right? That's what we know. And this is what the Rambam says. We actually studied in the Rambam earlier. The Rebbe commented on it a lot. So now we know God is everywhere. So now we look at the world. The world is essentially rays of godliness, which are defined. We have a car, a building, a house, a feeling, whatever it is. Everything in the world, everything in our minds has to be defined. If it's not defined, well, then it doesn't enter our minds, right? Now, just like the sun has rays outside which are defined, but inside they're not defined, Similarly, the world, God is everywhere. So, in reality, nothing in the world is truly defined. It's just God creating a perception for us that things are defined. So when we think about that a lot, when we think about, wait, so all my problems don't really have valid definition. They're created by God, but they're all really God. So then God is always with me, right? There cannot be a problem that God is not with me in, because everything in the world is defined by God, right? Everything that we define is created by God. So here, the Alter Rebbe says, let's just do a little bit more. Now the Alter Rebbe says, when you think about this a lot. So the key to this is because we're innately not spiritual, right? Because we're innately physical creatures, it's very hard to leave that realm of defined. I was just learning Pirkei Avos. So one of the rabbis says, "Ten loy, give God mishaloi from what you have, because you really belong to Him. When you give God, you're not really giving something that you have. You're giving God something that He has, right? Because you really belong to God. So it's the same thing. When you think about this a lot, and you think about how the whole world is really nothing in God's presence, and everything we see is really, it's almost, someone once asked me, it's almost like virtual reality to bring us closer to God, right? It's like the rays of the sun, which are, if the sun would disappear, the rays would all disappear. So they're also nothing. But to us, they feel like there's something, because that's what connects us, that's what comes here. However, when you go into the sun, then the rays are really, you could say they're non-existent. So, when you think about this a lot, yismach liboy, your heart will become joyous. V'sagol nafshe, it'll be a relief. Af gilas v'ranim v'chol lev v'nefesh ma'od v'amunazu. You'll have a lot of relief and joy with this faith. Ki ravihi, ki kiris al kimamish. This is great because it's literally showing how God is close to you. V'zeh kol adam. All right, do you have a question you want to ask? Sorry, I cut you off.
Nope, I'm good.
So the truth is the Alter Rebbe here is giving you something which is counterintuitive. Intuitively, we look at the world as a very defined, difficult place, and we fight to survive. Now, really, that's really not true at all. The world is a perfect garden created by God for us to get closer to Him and to use every opportunity to find Him in the world. And really, all the constraints and all the sadness and all the hardship is all. So now when we think about the world, how the world is really nothing, we think about it a lot. What the world is, how it came into existence, how the world isn't something which left God's domain, it's actually in God's domain. And everything created in the world is constantly being formed like that, just for us, then it'll make you quite joyous. You'll feel like, oh well, God is always with me. When I have good things or bad things, He's still with me because He's just setting me up to get closer to Him. If He's setting up to get closer to something in the world, well, we might get closer, we might not. But if it's just to get closer to Him, then we're pretty well off. This is what humans are, and this is the point why we're created. Later on, we're going to explain. So now, if we're down here in this world, and we know that there's God's total oneness and total aloneness of God in this world, that everything God in this world, so why did God do it? Why did God create a world which is so fake, right? It's so fake because it programs us to think that we need to survive in this world and survival of the fittest, and people can take control of things. Why did God create that reality for us? So the reason is because He wants us to show that God is one in this world. He wants us to show and live as if we are living inside the sun. Show, no, God is really here. So that's how we sanctify God's name. When we do a mitzvah, right? Every mitzvah is essentially doing this. So let's say you buy a pair of tefillin. What we're essentially doing is saying there's money that belongs to me, which I earned, it's hard, it's mine, and I'll give it to God, right? What you're really doing at a deeper level and really should be doing is you're showing, no, the money that God gave me, He wants me to use for Him to show that He's important, right? And the more I invest my life in God and Torah and mitzvahs, the more I'm showing that He is the singular existence in the world. So now that's why, people in the Holocaust, there were some people who gave their lives, right? And they said, I'm going to die as a Jew, because what they were saying is, I'm not a victim in the Holocaust. I'm an actor in this reality that God created to represent that God is the only reality. So we'll do a little bit more. What time is it? We have, okay. One thing that's sad about today on Erev Tisha B'Av is you're not allowed to study Torah after 12:36 today. You're not allowed to study Torah because Torah makes you happy, right? This makes you happy.
Right.
So therefore, the rabbis said, well, we don't want people, this is the day of mourning, so we don't want to make you too happy, so therefore you're not allowed to study Torah from today until basically tomorrow night. Now, luckily, there are certain subjects we can study because they don't make us so happy. These are the study and the history of the studying and the history of the destruction of the temple. So maybe we'll study that a little bit tomorrow morning. Okay. V'hine kam gedola simchas hediyet v'shafal anashim b'skarvusa melech bas v'dam u'misach sudar yitim v'esei. When a king comes and stays with you, even for a little bit, and gives you some attention, it's really joyous. Makes people really happy. Right? And that's a physical king coming to you for a little bit. How much more so when you know God is always with you? The King of Kings is always present with you in every situation. In fact, He's really creating every situation for you to get even closer to Him and to feel closer to Him.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a problem always remembering that. I'm sure this you have.
We all
you've
do.
heard this
We
a
all do.
million times before. So what do you suggest?
So here the Alter Rebbe, the Chabad Hasidic mentality is there are many different groups of Jewish people that say, oh, keep saying it to yourself, right? But the Alter Rebbe's methodology in the Tanya, as he says, the key to unlock, and that's actually what Chabad means. Chabad means those are the attributes of our intellect. The key to, sometimes we can't. The key to accessing that and changing it is thinking about the concepts we said a lot. Not when you're necessarily in trouble, because that might be sometimes hard to concentrate. So when you're having a hard time concentrate, one thing to do is, have a tzedakah box and give some tzedakah. You remind yourself that you have a purpose here. You're not like just meant to receive thoughts and ideas. So that might be a reminder to do a mitzvah, right? Do a mitzvah and pray and everything like that, because that's a reminder to refocus your life, what your life is dedicated to. However, when you're actually feeling good and clear-minded, drinking coffee in the morning, that's a really good time to think about these things. Think about them, and the way we are a lot of times is we only want to think about something when we have a problem, and that's always too late because our mind is in survival mode. So a lot of times it's good to think about these, and in general know if I'm going through the day and I'm going to become sad, and that's ultimately because I'm forgetting, and it's very hard for me to remember that God. So a lot of times I was talking with someone. A lot of times you tell someone, you say, "Oh, you don't have to worry about anything because God is in charge of everything." If you're already worrying, a lot of times the reaction that people will do on one level or another is they'll say, "Oh no, now I really have to worry because I have this voice that's convincing me not to worry." Because once you're in survival mode, when things question it, your body's reaction is to go into survival mode. So there are different advices to do, like take some tzedakah and give some tzedakah, and you remind yourself, wait, I don't need to have anything. It's all for God, right? I'm reminding myself, God's the provider. He takes care of me. He's with me every moment. That's when you're already in emergency mode. When you're feeling good, it's good to think about these things and kind of meditate on these ideas, and that will eventually change your perspective, and you'll be able to grow more in it. And it'll bring you joy, and it'll lower your sense of worriness when your body gets into worry mode. So I read this book recently of this guy who was a Lubavitcher from Poland. He lived in Poland, and his father was a chassid, and his father was a very, very wealthy. And he said his father was with Mr. Manners, always a pile of napkins like they used to do, and eating very carefully and everything. But he said there were two things that he noted about his father. When his father would go to be in front of the Rebbe, go visit the Rebbe, he had no manners. In other words, he was totally not self-conscious. In the shuls there, they were very packed. He would climb up the wall to just view the Rebbe and to learn from him and everything like that. In other words, he saw that his nature of being so proper was of being so proper and so much self-respect was almost put on hold when there was something really important. Right? Some people would say, I can't push to the front there to talk to the Rebbe because it's not befitting for me. But he saw that his father was totally focused on the Rebbe. Another thing that he mentioned, he said it was at the beginning of the Holocaust, and it was Sukkot. And the Jewish people were stuffed in some ghetto, and his father managed to build a little sukkah. You know what a sukkah is, right? Build a little sukkah, a little booth for the holiday of Sukkot, and managed to get a little bottle of vodka. And everyone was coming, and everyone was so worried. And he kept telling everyone, come, let's say l'chaim, and everything like that. And he was living in another world. He was so joyous. It was the holiday, even though they were in such hardship. So, he noticed his father died in the Holocaust, but his father was living on a different plane. So the Alter Rebbe says that you can live on that different plane if, when you're calm, you can take time to think about it for a long time. Think about it with your brain, intellectually, not emotionally. Don't think how you feel about it. Just think about it, and that will access your emotions and change you to feel less worried. And you'll be able, when the worry comes, or when the hardship comes, you'll be able to put into context. First thing you'll say is, hey, God gave me this situation. What does God want me to do in this situation? This bad situation is really the same as a good situation, because in both of them I get to fulfill my purpose. So that's what we're saying here. And we'll continue next week about it. We're gonna go more, but we're gonna say that really, like, this is the greatness of life is seen when you realize, like, we're like rays of sun in the sun. We're like everything in the world is really God-given, and God watched over, and God tended to, and God enjoyed everything you do and everything we go through. And it's all, basically, our life mission is to realize that. Because when we realize that, and that's a mitzvah in the Torah, we get to declare the oneness. There's only God. There's nothing else. There's no other forces outside of God. And then we get, now, a tzaddik is a righteous person who 100% knows this. In other words, he doesn't even see it. He doesn't need reminders. Most humans need reminders. In fact, most humans probably fall and make a lot of mistakes in this. And it takes them a long time to remember. I always talk about that sometimes people, and myself included, you have a certain amount of money and you don't want to give anything to tzedakah. It's mine, and then you start losing it. And then you kind of come to a point where you remember, it actually belongs to God. So the little I have left, I can give some of that to God. And then God gives you more, because he's like, okay, now you remember. Now you remember who it belongs to. So these are, the different lessons. But yeah, I would say that when you're in a panic situation, it's not necessarily, it's difficult to meditate because you're so emotionally charged. When you're in a panic situation, you should pray, do some mitzvahs, stuff like that. And then afterwards, what you could do is remember, take a note to yourself that when you're feeling good and you're driving in your car on a trip and it's quiet, you can think about these things, and then gradually it'll transform the way you perceive.
So I have a tzedakah box now.
Yeah. Do you have one?
Yes, my brother and sister-in-law brought one from.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's really pretty. It's been painted, hand painted and stuff. Anyway.
Goodbye, everybody. We're going to stop here.
Well, but describe the tradition or to me, because I'll throw a